It's week 14, and we have to get our waivers ready for the final week of the fantasy regular season. And to do that, of course, I'm Chris Allen here to try and help you guys make the decisions that you need in order to make your final push into the fantasy playoffs. But of course, I cannot do it alone with my regular co-host each week, Matt LaMarca. Is here with me to help you make the decisions. But before we dive into it, LaMarca, how you doing, man? I mean, we got one season before we finally get into the dance, but how you feeling?
Good. I'm playing for a bye this week in my big home league. So,
Nice.
We've got the playoff spot secured, but I would really enjoy not having to play that first game of the playoffs. We know that anything can happen once you are in the fantasy playoffs. So, big week and definitely a big week on the waiver wire side. We've got one clear guy that stands out as, kind of a must add. But there are some other, more intriguing names to talk about too down the stretch.
I think that's the roughest part of week 14. It's like the NFL decided to completely turn up the difficulty level on this game that we play on a week in and week out basis. We've got 6 teams on bye, and a lot of the headliners that you would see for a lot of championship rosters, especially from the quarterback position. You've got Lamar Jackson out this week. You've got Jaden Daniels out this week as well. But it's not just the teams that are going to be out taking their break because they're going to be on bye, but of course the injuries that have also been racked up over the last 3 to 4 days. I mean, Christian McCaffrey out again. Jordan Mason, his direct backup, out as well. We got Rashad Bateman for the Ravens with a knee injury. Ladd McConkey, one of the wide receivers for the Chargers, with a knee injury. And we've got key skill position players also hurt, along with some of the marquee names that are partly a part of a lot of the big teams that are pushing for a playoff spot on bye this week. So it's going to be tough for a lot of folks. I understand it, but that's why we're here to help you out with some of those decisions every single week. And if we don't get to your questions here today, I already see a couple in the chat. Please go and check out the website, FantasyLife.com. I'm pulling up our waiver wire report that should be available on the site every week from our own Kendall Valenzuela that goes through all of the information that you need from an injury standpoint. The top waiver ads that we also have listed there on the site. And of course, also go ahead and check out our waiver wire tool that takes a look at some, not just the names that you should be adding, but just our quick look or our quick type of ranking system that we have there to try and give you an idea of who are the guys that we are prioritizing as a staff. So we kind of look at things internally, say how much you should be bidding on them from a fab standpoint, which are the guys you should be targeting, so on and so forth. But I guess LaMarca, I mean, outside of Isaac Guerendo, because I know he's probably going to be the one guy that everybody's going to be vying for, is there somebody that really sticks out to you as somebody that if you're missing a quarterback this week, missing a wide receiver due to injury, who are you looking at as a guy that you're looking to target?
I think for me, if Adam Thielen is still available in your league, he's somebody that I would feel very comfortable starting at this point. I wasn't sure what kind of role he would have for the Panthers coming back. Their season kind of over already. They have some young receivers. I was a little uncertain initially whether or not they would just thrust him right back into that wide receiver 1 role, but that's exactly what's happened. He has good chemistry with Bryce Young, and the Panthers are clearly prioritizing the development of Bryce Young over the development of some of their younger receivers. And that makes sense, right? That's I think a good decision for the long-term outlook of their franchise. So if he's out there, certainly think he is worth scooping up. And if you're in a little bit of a deeper league, certainly most of the leagues that I play in, Adam Thielen isn't available, but Nick Westbrook-Akine, I think, is definitely somebody who can get onto your radar at this point. Will Levis starting to play some decent football. Westbrook-Akine is coming off the best game he's had from a utilization standpoint and from a production standpoint. So very favorable schedule as well down the stretch. I don't know if I necessarily want to put him into my starting roster for a big week 14 matchup if I need to make the playoffs, but he's somebody that, at least at this point deserves to be on your team.
I agree with that one. And I think the tough part that I'm trying to reconcile with Nick Westbrook-Akine is just how he is creating like how he's generating fantasy production right now. Just this past week, 3 catches, 2 of them went for touchdowns. The week beforehand, 2 catches, 1 of them went for a touchdown. The week before that, 2 catches, 1 of them went for. It's like it doesn't make sense how he continues to wind up finding himself in the end zone on such little volume, or at least so few receptions. I'd say from a target standpoint, he has been one of the primary weapons for Will Levis over the past 3 to 4 weeks. It's really been just him and Calvin Ridley. So I could say from an opportunity standpoint, and to your point, Lamarca, that if we're seeing somebody that's up there around the 20-ish% target share rate, and that's over multiple weeks so far, yes, it's hard to say that, well, he can't catch a touchdown every week, but he is seeing the volume from a week-to-week standpoint. It would make some sense that at least having him on your roster, knowing that you are kind of signing up for the Will Levis experience, which is something of a roller coaster every single week. It does make it kind of tough, especially in week 14, where you're probably in a situation where you need those points. You need that W in order to make sure that you're still competing for that final playoff spot, if that's a situation you find yourself in. But I agree with you for both of those guys. I mean, I really do like at least trying to target both of them on the waiver wire and then seeing how things shake out, especially for the Titans, because, yeah, their schedule does look pretty good over the next 3 to 4 weeks or so. But all right, so this is what we're doing every week, y'all. If you haven't checked out the show beforehand, welcome. Appreciate you guys all checking us out. We're here in order to answer as many questions that we can over the next, I'd say, 45 minutes or so to see like what you have planned, not just for week 14, but of course, with the most critical time of the fantasy season coming up. I mean, the fantasy playoffs are just right around the corner, but we want to make sure that your lineups are set to make that final push. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if your question isn't answered today, go ahead and check out the website. All the tools from the start sit tool, the waiver wire article that I just pulled up a minute ago, all the utilization report analysis that's available from our own Dwayne McFarland. I mean, everything's available there on the site. UR stuff is available if you get that tier 2 subscription. I think the QR code that you can see right down below us will get you to that. So all of that being said, let's dive into at least one of the first questions that I see down there from Mark. Looks like it might be a little bit of a longer one, but let's see if we can answer his question today. So this is from Mark. Full PPR, SF League, pick up Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, or wait for it, Aiden O'Connell after just put up 340 and 2 TDs against Kansas City. I mean, if we were just talking about Nick Westbrook-Akine and his run of touchdowns and thinking that these are things that just cannot continue to happen, I know it's a 1-game sample versus an 8-game sample for NWI, but still, out of those 3, Lamarca, who do you think? Russ, can he continue to do the moonball thing? Derek Carr, I think I prefer Derek Carr out of that group, but how are you looking at this one?
The matchup is clearly the hardest for Wilson, but it's not like Cleveland is unbeatable this season, right? I mean, we just saw Bo Nix and the Broncos put up 400 plus yards against them last night. And I think just from a talent standpoint, Wilson is in a different tier altogether than Carr and O'Connell. Derek Carr, he's okay if you give him ideal circumstances. And now that Taysom Hill is out of the picture, maybe he has a little bit more scoring upside. But I just think Wilson is the far better player at this point. So give me Russ. It is a little bit of a tougher matchup than playing against the Giants, but Cleveland, again, not the same defensive team that they were last year. I think Wilson's just the best player here.
I can agree with that, and especially with the loss of Taysom Hill that you just noted. And if you just even want to look at the game logs for just this past week, and that was with Taysom Hill available, no pass catcher for the New Orleans Saints got even over 50 yards. And we're talking about guys that we're not really interested in rostering. I mean, outside of Alvin Kamara, I mean, Juwan Johnson, who is mixed in for a couple of targets here and there. MVS, who's probably is the Nick Westbrook-Akine that type of production generation for him. I mean, Foster Moreau, Dante Pettis. I mean, these are not guys that we're even thinking about rostering from a waiver wire standpoint. So if we can at least see ourselves looking at George Pickens as an outlet for Russell Wilson, Pat Freiermuth at the tight end position, he could potentially be maybe mid-range floor, not a high ceiling option if you need a tight end option for week 14. I could see Russell Wilson going up against the Browns and having a potentially better outing than whereas with Derek Carr having the easier matchup, he just has so many fewer options to throw to. I could see a good day for Alvin Kamara. But any of the rest of the players that are associated with the Saints offense, it's hard for me to kind of see that. So I'm with you. It did seem like, last night watching that Monday night game, Bo Nix had at least some pretty good opportunities to toss the ball downfield to his receivers and keep the offense moving throughout the game. And Russ has, I would say, similar caliber weapons as compared to what the Broncos have. So it's like I'd say the potential is there for Russ to have at least a similar outing as Bo Nix just had this past week. So I think I'm with you. I'd probably go Russ, maybe Carr for the matchup, if you want to try and play it that way. And then Aiden O'Connell, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, because really, again, for Aiden O'Connell, it's what, Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers and pretty much nobody else afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the matchup for AOC is great. Tampa Bay is about as good as it gets in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. I can't get there with him. I mean, I know he played okay against the Chiefs, but we've seen enough of this guy to know that that's not really something you can expect from him on a regular basis. So I don't think that the gap between him and Carr is massive. Like I feel like the floor is a little bit lower with O'Connell. Wilson, again, just feels like the safest option for me. And I don't think that his ceiling is, lower than any of these other guys, even though they're in better matchups.
Yeah, I can get behind that. So all right, so hopefully that was helpful to you, Mark. And again, like as I see a few more questions start to pop into the chat, I mean, again, welcome. I mean, it's week 14, probably one of the tougher weeks in order to make some of these roster decisions. If not for the bye-mageddon that we find ourselves yet again, like this fantasy season, but also with the playoffs right around the corner, it becomes all the more tense for us in order and the decisions that we have to make for the rosters coming out. But of course, go ahead and check out the website, check out all of the tools from the analysis that's available. The other shows, check out, I mean, we're here live on YouTube, or the show will be up on YouTube, but also check out the rest of the stuff that's available on our YouTube channel, FantasyLife, that's available there. And again, as you see there in the QR code below hand, I mean, it's just the utilization tools, all the FantasyLife tools, tier 2 subscription, I mean, everything that you need in order to get you set for this week. We've got it available for you on the site right now, or at least we'll be there in the next couple of days. All right, so let's keep it moving and answer a few more questions. I see a couple of them available in the chat right now. This one's from Rod, looking at, a potential trade option from Rod. So let's see, people are still trading right now. I thought the trade deadline had been passed for
interesting.
Yeah, so this is okay, interesting. So trade Rachaad White for Jacoby Myers, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 2 flex. With Bucky's potential injury, it's got Bijan, Ken Walker, Higgins, DJ Moore, Sutton, Josh Downs. So a decent wide receiver group. All right, so trading away Rachaad White and picking up Jacoby Myers. I mean, we're just talking about AOC and potentially fluky outing against the Chiefs, but Jacoby Myers without Devontae Adams, well over 20% target share. Like this has been over like the last 6-ish weeks, almost 2 months now without Devontae Adams in the lineup. Really has been just him and Brock Bowers as the 2 targets for whomever's under center for the Raiders. Trading away Rachaad White, I don't know. I feel like I'd want to keep White, with the potential injury and for Bucky Irving. Not to say that Irving's going to miss time or there's no indication at this point, but I would still see a potential split backfield for the Buccaneers. I don't know, LaMarca. I would almost say keep White, especially with the way that the Bucs offense has been rolling. But do you see a scenario where having Myers on your roster is the better option here?
I think it's pretty close. I think certainly this team is stronger at running back than it is at receiver. But the fact that you can start 2 running backs and 2 flexes, you can play all of Rachaad White, Bucky, Bijan, and Ken Walker. Like you can play all 4 of those guys in the same week. So the fact that it's half PPR instead of full PPR also makes a guy like Jacoby Myers a bit less valuable, right? I mean, his biggest upside right now is that he can get double-digit targets in a given game. So that's just not quite as valuable in a half PPR league as it is in a full PPR league. If I was going to make a trade like this, I'd need a little bit more than just Jacoby Myers straight up. I don't hate the idea of trying to improve your wide receiver depth a little bit, but I think you can do a little bit better with Rashad White here.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too. Again, I don't hate the idea of trying to get a wide receiver that gets as much volume as Jacoby Myers has over the past like 6-ish weeks or so. And especially in an offense that could play a little bit more aggressively, like as we just saw this past week with Aiden O'Connell under center. I get it, but I want somebody with a bit more upside. Or even if you are going to take the volume, let's see if you can tack on another player that would also be able to provide similar levels of either just volume or at least a bit more upside. So if you can do a potential 2-for-1, like if you're taking or if you're trading away Rashad White, a player that is in a good offense, seeing enough volume or has the potential for volume that he would at least is in the high end or like mid-range to high end RB2 discussion, especially with so many running backs that are going to be on bye this upcoming week. I would say getting a wide receiver 2 that doesn't have that same upside, right? Or wide receiver 2 doesn't have like the ability to get into the wide receiver 1 conversation like Jacoby Myers does at this point. I'd say, let's give me a little bit more. Give me a high end handcuff, like a running back handcuff if you wanted to do that. So give me Jacoby Myers plus, I don't know, insert Ray Davis, give me Braylon Allen, give me like one of those like high-end backups that would at least give you some sort of punch or at least have that type of utility on the back end of your roster. That I think that would be how I'd want to approach this. So that I get wanting to target a guy like Myers, but I'd say just give me a little bit more, one more piece onto the back end of that deal. And then I think that would be a little bit more palatable for me.
Yeah, put a little cherry on top.
Yeah, I think that's how I go for it. It's just like, and when you're doing those types of negotiations with other managers, see if you can have that type of discussion with them and say like, all right, well, like try, hype up your player. I mean, like you do have a player that's a part of a pretty potent offense right now, still vying for a playoff spot. You're trading him away for a wide receiver that has no hopes or aspirations to play. I mean, if you try and use those types of, that type of discussion, you might get a little bit more out of it. So that's where I'm at. So, okay. All right, so let's keep things moving right along. And this next question that's available, I see here in the chat, this is from Lane. Looking at this now defense and special teams discussion. Drop Kansas City's defense for Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo did keep the 49ers offense in check for pretty much the entire game. They did have the added benefit of playing in the snow, where the 49ers probably don't have that same type of experience. But still, Kansas City this week, who do the Chiefs play this week? I'm trying to remember who they play this week.
Chargers.
They play the Chargers. So another divisional matchup. Second time that they've played them. Yeah, they played them earlier this week. But that was when the Chargers were still a bit more run heavy. And also this week, Chargers at least have one potential injury for their pass catching group, and that is with Ladd McConkey, who did have that knee problem or hip injury, or trying to remember correctly. Yeah, knee injury. So that's at least something to pay attention to. But I don't know, Lamarca. I think I'd rather go with Buffalo's defense, even with Kansas City potentially playing against a banged up Chargers defense. But do you see things differently here?
I'm like Bill Murray in Space Jam when he shows up at the end and he starts drawing up the play. And then Michael Jordan's like, Bill, we don't got the ball. We on defense. And Bill Murray just goes, oh, I don't do defense.
I don't do
defense, flip a coin. I think Buffalo's the better unit for my money. I don't know either team's schedule well enough to make any sort of prediction on which one is going to be better for the remainder of the season. But ultimately, I think Buffalo would be the side that I lean towards just on vibes. So fantasy defenses are hard, man. It's tough to sort of pick on a week to week basis which one you think is going to be better. So I'll go with Buffalo, but really just flip a coin.
I would say, though, the other point that kind of works in Buffalo's favor, I would say both teams are fairly high in terms of pressure rate generated on a week-to-week basis. But I would say for Kansas City, it's more likely that if they do generate pressure, Justin Herbert has been more apt to run. We've seen his scrambling rate pick up over the last 6 weeks or so. Whereas on the flip side of that decision for Buffalo going up against the Rams, it was what I think just last week was the first time Matt Stafford had scrambled at all this entire season. He has been one of the more inefficient quarterbacks. Like, yeah, he's like honestly, I still have like some I guess some hate in my heart because people can see the hat saying around me because like Stafford was the one that beat us in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Not still bitter about that at all. But it would be that if you do wind up generating pressure and breaking through the Rams offensive line, you're more apt to get some sacks versus the Chiefs going against the Chargers. We do see that scrambling ability from the youngster Justin Herbert. And actually, just this past week with the Rams going up against the Saints, I mean, we don't really think too much about the Saints defense. And like that's not one that people are trying to stream or use on a week-to-week basis. I mean, still we're able to limit Matthew Stafford to under 200 passing yards and got 2 sacks in. So while like the passing game was able to operate well enough so that Puka Nacua got his and Kyrie Williams got in the end zone at least once. I'd say overall, if you are looking for a team that, or at least a defense or an offense to target that you can maybe limit some passing yardage, get in a couple of sacks, maybe force a turnover because the Rams are so pass friendly. I'd say that going against the Rams with Buffalo, not the worst option between those. So I think Buffalo would be the better out of those two. But then to LaMarcus' point, I mean, you never know what type of firepower or how each offense is going to operate on a week-to-week basis. So that is something to at least keep in mind. But I think we both agree that Buffalo probably is the better out of those two. All right. Keeping it moving. We got another, let's say 30, 35 minutes or so before we get out of here, before we head into week 14. Let's see what else we got here. I think this next question from Joseph, looking at a non-PPR question. So we got like all the formats. We've done like super flex. We got defense and special teams, all sorts of questions that we have to answer today. But that's what we're here to do. So from Joseph, non-PPR, can I flex Pacheco over Jonnu? His other tight end is McBride. Other running backs are Kamara, and he already has Isaac Guerendo. Well done. That's sharp on you, Joseph, to already have Isaac Guerendo on your roster. So you don't even have to freak out and drop all your fab or use your number one waiver claim on Isaac Guerendo. So good on you. So out of these two, Isaiah Pacheco, Jonnu Smith, at least even if it is like in non-PPR, so we're not really concerned about like how many receptions that Jonnu might have. I still might go Jonnu Smith just as much as he's been used over these past 3 to 4 weeks with Tua Tagovailoa back there. Pacheco still having that split backfield with Kareem Hunt. Also have just this past week saw even Samaje Perine still used out of the backfield in obvious passing situations. I think it's Jonnu Smith, even though he does have Trey McBride. I mean, rostering or even starting 2 tight ends, especially if they do get that amount of volume that Jonnu Smith has been having over these past month or so, I think that's still viable in this case. But do you think Pacheco is the better option out of this too?
I think Pacheco is the guy that I would lean towards most weeks, but with this specific matchup versus the Chargers are a real tough defense. And I think with Pacheco, there's still some concerns about the utilization. I do fully expect him to be the team's, clear top running back by the time the playoffs roll around. But there's really no need for the Chiefs to rush him into that, right? They are 10-1. They're going to cruise to the playoffs and probably the top seed in the AFC. They don't necessarily need to give Pacheco 75 to 80% of the snaps in his second game back. So Jonnu to me has emerged as he's a top 50 flex type play every week at this point. Until the targets dry up for one reason or another, I have no problem starting him. He may be a tight end, but he has proven that he has wide receiver upside for the Dolphins at the moment. So Eventually, I do think Pacheco is going to be the guy who you're going to be starting over him. But at the moment, it's still Jonnu for me.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up our utilization report, the game logs that are available on the site. So please, if folks don't already have access to these tools, so you can see the not just how an individual player is being used, but also how they're being used relative to their teammates. And as you can see here, and I know it was Pacheco's first game back, but we're seeing 40% of the snaps to Kareem Hunt, 33 to Pacheco, and also Samaje Perine, while he didn't have any carries, still almost a third of the snaps going to Samaje Perine because he's out there for the 2-minute drill. Also, therefore, got 2% of the targets. I mean, they are trying to spread out that workload as much as possible. And really, at what, just one loss on the season so far? I mean, what is their incentive to try and force the situation for any of their running backs? That's the thing I'm trying to struggle. I'm struggling against saying that, well, yeah, they should really give all the work to Pacheco. If they're already, they have to be in late January mode right now in terms of their personnel decisions. They're already thinking towards the playoffs. They're thinking towards that three-peat, trying to focus in on one of their running backs, especially the running back that just came off of IR and potentially hurting him again during the fantasy season or the regular season for them. It just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Whereas for Jonnu Smith and the Dolphins, they do find themselves still in the playoff hunt. Jonnu Smith still has been targeted around the goal line. He was actually the target on that pass that got tipped up into the end zone that Tyreek Hill wound up coming down with on that late night Thursday night game on Thanksgiving. And with as much as he's been used over the past 4, 5, 6 weeks, I would say that Jonnu Smith, like even if he is another tight end, you have a solid tight end one already in Trey McBride, but rostering another, I would say, high-end pass catcher or high-end target earner in Jonnu Smith, like, isn't necessarily a bad idea. Whereas Isaiah Pacheco, I know we're all kind of tethered to this idea that, oh, he plays for the Chiefs, oh, Patrick Mahomes, oh, high-scoring offense. That really hasn't been the case so much this season. So just thinking that, oh, you're rostering a player that's attached to Patrick Mahomes, you have to start him. Not really the case this year. So I'd say looking at some of this data that we have available on the site, again, tier 2 subscription, go ahead and sign up for that and get in on that action over the last like 3 to 4 weeks of the fantasy season to make sure you have access to these tools and they can give you that insight. So that, again, contextualizing their usage and making sure that you have all the analysis that you need for the next, again, like 3 to 4 weeks or so of the fantasy season. But all right.
By the way, you know who's loving this Jonnu Smith breakout?
Who?
Arthur Smith.
Oh, for sure.
Guys like, see, I told you all. You thought I was crazy? He's better than Kyle Pitts.
Yeah. And also, he's probably enjoying this Kyle Pitts, downfall of it. We've only had, maybe 2 games or 2 weeks so far where Kyle Pitts has actually popped up for a couple of good games, and all of us clamoring for, why hasn't Arthur Smith been using him as much as possible? And of course, now vindication for Arthur Smith. I mean, see how well he worked with Justin Fields in the early part of the season, how well things are working for Russ Wilson as well. This really has been just the Arthur Smith vindication tour throughout the 2024 season.
The Bijan stuff still doesn't look great in retrospect, but
other
than that, he's coming out okay.
Yeah, I think he's not as bad as we made him out to be. So I think that's completely fair, LaMarca. I definitely get that. All right. Let's see what other questions we got in the chat. I see a few more folks like popping in. And again, thanks for joining us here on week 14. Again, tough week, bunch of teams on bye, bunch of injuries to consider. But of course, we're here to provide as much analysis as we can in order to make sure that you're making the proper roster decisions. But all right, let's go and take a look at what's Tyler got for us. Tyler, I think he's been in the chat like most weeks so far. So what's going on, Tyler? So he's got Jaden Reed needs a better tight end other than Cade Otton. Let's see. You got Johnson, Freiermuth, Kraft, Disley. All right, looking at all of those guys, I know Pat Freiermuth just hopped in there for a good week just this past week against my Bengals. Tucker Kraft, Will Disley. I mean, out of that group, who sticks out to you? I'm thinking it's Will Disley.
Who is Johnson? I'm trying to think a brain meltdown. I know there's Theo Johnson, but he just got hurt,
and I think he went on IR.
Oh, Juwan Johnson, maybe?
That must be it. Juwan Johnson.
Yeah, I don't really think Juwan Johnson's in the mix for me personally. I like Tucker Kraft. I think Tucker Kraft is a borderline tight end one. If I'm looking at our week 14 rankings at the moment, and we have Otten at 11, Tucker Kraft at 10, and Fryermuth at 12 at the position. So
Okay.
all three of those guys packed really tightly together. Tucker Kraft plays for a really good offense. We'll see what happens with Romeo Dobbs this week, but with him out of the lineup last week, he saw a nice little spike in production. Certainly, they could continue to use him, but I might give Cade Otton one more ride. The Raiders are a really good matchup. They've been pretty poor against the pass for most of the season. I might give him one more shot. I know that the usage hasn't been great since Mike Evans has come back, but I think in this spot specifically, he has a little bit more upside maybe than the other two guys. So I don't hate Kraft. If you wanted to make the switch to Tucker Kraft, totally fine with it. But I think personally for me, Otten would be the guy in week 14.
Yeah, my concern for Otten, it's been this varying or like a shift in targets to either the tight ends or running backs, and that's with Mike Evans coming back. I mean, in that 4-ish week stretch where there's no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, the Baker Mayfield was targeting non-wide receivers at over around half of his targets were going to either running backs or tight ends. That's dropped with Evans back, and let's see if he can actually, if Evans can wind up getting to his 1,000-yard season. What would that be, 11 in a row if he winds up doing it? But still, Cade Otton still is a fairly decent part of that offense, and his
21% target share last week.
Yep, and I was just going to say that.
He's on the field more than just about any tight end in football. So
yeah, yep, I would say that's Otten. I would say Otten or Kraft are probably the two that I'm thinking are the better options there. Juwan Johnson, I think, is fine if you really want to try and force him in on the idea that no Taysom Hill, really no other pass catchers or wide receivers that you, or at least that are scaring you in terms of taking volume away from them, away from a guy like Juwan Johnson. I'd say that's fine, but it's just we haven't seen it so far this season. We're just assuming that role is going to be there for him now with guys being taken away. So I'd say Otten. I would go for the volume that we know has been there in the past. Also in a better offense than Juwan Johnson. But if you want to say that the volume is going to be there for him, okay, fine. But I'd say it's probably Otten, Kraft, and then Juwan Johnson after in that order for me.
And as to Tyler's other point, he's worried that having Jaden Reed means he should not then also have Tucker Kraft, having two guys on the same team. And the way that I look at this is that each team has a pie, right? Let's say the Packers are going to throw for 300 yards each week. By having two players in that passing attack, you're just locking up a bigger piece of that pie for yourself. So I think having two receivers for the same team increases your weekly floor, but it decreases your weekly ceiling, because the odds are that you're not going to have those two players combined for all of the production from one team. But if you had two players that were split between two teams, they each have a slightly higher overall potential. You understand?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You follow?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of how I view it.
And another point in Kraft's favor is that they also play on the Thursday night game. So going up against the Lions, Romeo Dobbs, still not certain if he's going to be able to play since he was out just this past week with the concussion. So fewer targets, or the target share might start to condense around a guy like Tucker Kraft. Also had Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, so on and so forth. They're taking some volume away. But I would assume that in this case, pay attention to some practice reports over the next couple of days. But in that case, a guy like Tucker Kraft in that offense, like with Jordan Love, at least does have a bit of a potential to see a bit more volume, even if it is on a not even a shorter week, because they all have had essentially 6 to 7 days in order to rest. So I mean, Kraft still pops up as a guy that I would want to have on my roster, even again if they play on Thursday night, because again they've had the extra time to rest. But all right, let's see what else have we got. All right, so again, go ahead and check out some of the ranks. We did reference the rankings that we have available on the site, FantasyLife.com. Those are free rankings that we have that's already up for week 14. And as LaMarco was mentioning, Tucker Kraft is in our top 12 for this week, actually, along with Pat Freiermuth as well, listed as our number 9 tight ends, which is pretty interesting, with a couple of the other guys listed at least a bit behind them. But either way, regardless of what you think about like our ranks, please go ahead and like use those as kind of your barometer for how you want to make some of those decisions. And if not that, again, we pulled up the utilization report game logs. We're trying to reference the start sit or the waiver wire tool that's available on the site as well, along with the article from our own Kendall Valenzuela that's available for you to check out on a week-to-week basis to help you set some of those roster decisions. Again, for such a tough week, you've got 6 teams on bye, bunch of injuries that you have to consider. I mean, all that stuff is there. But again, try and get to as many questions as we can today. Got another 20 minutes or so. Again, hopefully we're getting to as many as possible. But all right, let's see. What do we got? What do we got
before we take another question, Chris?
Yeah,
I think we gotta carve out at least a couple of minutes here to talk about Guerendo.
Okay, all right.
I want to know your thoughts on how much fab you think is appropriate for this guy. Is this an empty the clip type of situation? Because in my eyes, I don't know if we're getting a better ad at this point in the season than Guerendo. So, in leagues where I have money left, which is most of them, and Guerendo is on the waiver wire, I'm dropping every dollar I've got to add him to my team.
Yes, that is 100% correct. I would say we can't project injuries. And right now, and in this particular week, in this particular situation, let's take like team context out of it, right? In this particular situation, we have a starting running back on a team available out up there on the waiver wire without any real competition for touches. That is a situation
and a productive running back.
Yes,
he's
and a productive running back.
5.9 yards per carry in his limited touches this year. And as a prospect, I find this to be fascinating. There are 5 running backs in combine history who have run better than 4.4, who weigh more than 215 pounds, and have a burst score of at least 120. 4 of them are Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, and Adrian Peterson. The 5th is Isaac Guerendo.
Dang, I didn't know that. All right. I would say...
Listen, is Isaac Guerendo in that class? No, because he wasn't drafted in the 1st or 2nd round like all those other guys were.
Yeah.
But he very much intrigues me.
Yeah. And I would say for Guerendo specifically is that we know that he can earn targets. That was one of the issues that I had with Jordan Mason as like the running back ad of the year. I mean, of course, the volume being in an offense that we thought was going to be one of the higher efficient offenses in the league, so on and so forth, made him a high priority ad, or at least the time that we knew that CMC was going to be gone. If he's out there in the waiver wire, he was the ad, like the drop all your fab, blah, blah, blah. In this case, though, and we've seen it over the past, we saw it over like the 6 to 8-ish weeks or so for Mason, he wasn't earning any targets. He got all the rushing carries and he got all the work inside the 5, inside the 10, but it wasn't running a ton of routes, also wasn't seeing that much passing volume. And we literally saw just on Sunday night, even in the snow, Isaac Guerendo was the one that was targeted and wound up running into the end zone. Now, of course, it was late in the game. The 49ers needed to do something on offense, and Guerendo wound up getting a couple targets. But we never saw that type of work consistently out of Jordan Mason. So if we're getting not just the rushing for Guerendo, which we got all that with Jordan Mason, but we should expect to see some level of route running participation, also some target volume from a pass catching standpoint. And we are getting more out of this running back than we did out of the backup in Jordan Mason in the earlier parts of the season. So I'm with you that if you have any fab left, drop it all for Jordan Mason. I don't care what the vibes are in San Francisco. Yes, they're knocked, like at least if not fully knocked out of the playoffs, but quickly on their way out, just like my Bengals. And even with their upcoming schedule, I mean, they've got Chicago, Rams, Dolphins. I mean, all tough outs from a rush defense standpoint. If we are also going to get some receiving work out of him, Guerendo has to be like the top ad for this week.
You can definitely run on Chicago.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. Honestly, at least over the past like month or so. Yeah.
The pass catching stuff would be a nice cherry on top, but if I can get a running back who is, locked into like 15 to 18 carries a game and is going to get the goal line work and has averaged almost 6 yards a carry for the season. Like, I don't even know if he needs to catch any passes. It's great if he does, but I don't think you need that.
That's fair. And I agree with that. I think my only, the only point I was trying to make is that he can be better than what Jordan Mason was for us.
And Mason was a top 10 guy before Christian McCaffrey got hurt. So
he's got
big
more
ceiling,
outs.
I think.
Yeah, definitely. I see a larger ceiling than Jordan Mason. Just hopefully he winds up staying healthy, unlike the other two guys that were listed ahead of him. All right, we've got maybe 10, 15 minutes ish left for this week 14 waiver wire show. Again, appreciate everybody stopping by. See a bunch of questions in the chat so far. So let's see if we can try to get to those as quickly as we can. But as I've been mentioning throughout the show, don't get your question answered here. Check out the site, FantasyLife.com. Waiver wire tool, start sit tool, rankings that we referenced, the UR stuff that is also available with a tier 2 subscription. So again, with about 10-ish minutes or so left in this, let's see if we can get to as many as we possibly can. All right, producer Paul, throw them up as quickly as you can. Who's next for us? All right, this is from Freddie. Is Breece Hall a sit? And should we start Najee, Neighbors, or I just picked up Guerendo and PPR? Breece just doesn't seem reliable. Looking at their options right now, especially with Pittsburgh going up against Cleveland this upcoming week. So you got Najee, Malik Neighbors, Giants. They play the Saints this upcoming weekend, and of course Guerendo. I'm starting Guerendo. I know with everything that we just discussed, you're also starting Guerendo, Lamarca. But is there any case in order to say that we should definitely be starting Breece? I know he's been in the top 12 discussion throughout the entirety of the year, but I think at this point we have to take a closer look at the situation for the Jets. And I'd say that Breece isn't an essential start in week 14.
Breece is a completely reasonable sit if you have options like this on your bench. The Jets are going nowhere. They are done. They are cooked. I see no reason to push this guy if he's not at 100%. We saw that last week with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. Was that the other guy? Somebody else they had mixing in as a pass catching back.
Isaiah Davis.
Like Breece is his days of being a must start running back are well in the past. So I'm with you. I lean Guerendo. You can make a strong case for Neighbors as well, who continues to earn just boatloads of targets regardless of who is at quarterback for the Giants. But I think the upside with Guerendo in this matchup against the Bears, who just got shredded on the ground by the Lions, that's the way that I'm going.
Yeah, I would agree there. I know that Breece Hall last week did get 60% of the team's attempts, but that was in, again, one of those that's a lesser share that we've seen from him in the past. And also Braylon Allen mixed again, not just for rushing attempts, quarter of the attempts went to Braylon Allen, but also he got some targets as well. So yeah, not an essential start for me in week 14. So I would go either of those other guys at this point. I mean, Guerendo is probably the top one, but also Malik Neighbors. And even if it is going to be Drew Lock or whomever throwing him the ball, I would say that from a target share standpoint, opportunity standpoint, either one of those two guys are the better options for me. All right, let's keep things moving. Again, a little less than 10 minutes to go. This next question here from Schnallen. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I messed that up. Start Herbert, Nix, or Tua, though, for the fantasy playoffs. Stroud, Jameis, and Caleb Williams are also available. Herbert, Nix, or Tua. So we've got Herbert going up against, we just talked about that matchup a little bit ago. But then, let's see, Bo Nix, Denver. Actually, Denver's on bye.
They're on bye this week.
Yeah, I'd say Tua and Miami, they are going up against the Jets. Or Stroud, Jameis, and Caleb. I'll tell you right now, I'm not starting CJ Stroud. I'm not doing that. No. Take Stroud immediately off the table. Not doing that. Jameis, again, we talked about that matchup a bit ago as well, or at least on the flip side of that, since they're playing Pittsburgh again, hopefully this time without snow. And then also Caleb Williams, again, a bit better now, especially over the past couple of weeks. And the hope would be without Matt Eberflus pulling any of the strings, that we get a bit more of an output offensively for the Bears. But I mean, out of that group, I still think I'd still lean a bit towards Herbert there. But are any of those other guys really stick out to you as players that you really want to start other than Justin Herbert?
Herbie for me. I mean, disaster game last week against the Falcons. That looked like it was going to be a smash spot on paper, but anytime you've got a West Coast team traveling east, playing at 1 p.m. Eastern time, weird things can happen. I think they also played on Monday Night Football the week prior, and then
Yeah.
of course you've got the potential look ahead spot, this week with the Chiefs being such an important matchup for them. If you look at his previous 5 games, he was quarterback 13 or better in all of them. So I think we can give Herbert a pass for last week. He may not have the upside that you ideally want at your quarterback position on a week-to-week basis, but with the way that they're passing the ball a little bit more frequently now, I feel very comfortable having him as a starting quarterback.
I agree there. The only concern would be to watch the practice reports over the next couple of weeks. As is noted in our waiver wire report, Lad McConkey wound up leaving that game with the knee injury. So if he is forced to miss any time, of course, that drops down our expectations for Herbert and the rest of the passing game. But as of right now, no indications that he's going to be out for week 14. But again, just something to monitor, as that's definitely going to impact his Herbert's upside for this upcoming weekend. So other than that, I would say Herbert is the better option out of those. But all right, let's keep things moving. Less than 10 minutes, around 5 minutes left before we have to get on out of here. Let's see what else we've got here. This one, next question from Mark. Stafford, Purdy, Levis, or Russell Wilson for week 14? I think we talked earlier. I think Russell Wilson is probably the better one. But all right, Lamarca, I could make a case for Will Levis going up against Jacksonville. I would say just don't watch the game and just look at the box score afterwards. But I'd say Russell Wilson is probably the safest option. Out of that.
I can't do it. If I start Will Levis and he puts up a bad score, I'm going to just hate myself in the morning. You know what I'm saying? Like I made this decision and I'm going to have to look in the mirror and live with it.
Yeah.
We have Wilson as the top option of this quartet in our week 14 rankings. That jives with me.
Yeah. That's like if you go look at his box score, 212-2 last week for Levis, 278-2 with a pick, but he still ran for 41 yards the week beforehand, 295 the week before that. Is okay. I mean, it looks like if you watch the game, you're probably going to be like completely tearing your hair out. I'd say Russell Wilson probably gives you the same floor, potentially a similar or even better ceiling just for Wilson, as we saw just this past week. So I'd say Russ sticks out, but if you're in a pinch, I mean, Levis going up against the Jags, I mean, we know that is one of the defenses that we do want to target from a pass catching standpoint against. And without, like, we're assuming that Trevor Lawrence isn't going to play there. It's not like the Jaguars are going to be able to fight back too much. So I'd say Levis, Wilson's the best out of that group. Purdy, Stafford, I'd say they're a cut below for me.
We do have Levis as the next option in our rankings. He's QB 13. Wilson is QB 11. So It's close, but I just if I start Levis and it doesn't work out, it's just not going to be fun in my head. You know?
No, it doesn't sound fun at all. I mean, it's like rostering Jameis Winston. I mean, it's not great for anybody involved until after the game is over and you just look at the fantasy point totals afterwards. Like I said, if you wind up having stuck rostering him, just don't watch the game. All right, and then just look at what happens afterwards. All right. So again, less than 5 minutes to go. Let's get a few more in before we get on out of here. This one from Z. Panic on Brees. Yes. Keon Coleman and Tillman worth holding. Biggest question is Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels for week 16.
Jeez.
All right, we're hopping ahead there. Panic on Brees. I think we can both agree. Yes.
Yep.
Like complete panic. Keon Coleman and Tillman worth holding. I'll hold Cedric Tillman. Keon Coleman, non-essential hold for
Absolutely. Me. What's the upside of Keon Coleman?
Right. We've seen that offense work with and without him. So Josh Allen, front runner for the MVP so far this season at this point. So I don't think Keon Coleman is essential to that offense. I would say for week 16, though, so for the Indianapolis Colts and their big win, they play against Tennessee in their break but don't bend offense. They'll give a bunch of points but limit opposing passing yardage. And also Jaden Daniels in the Washington offense, they play Philly in week 16. So where are you at with either like AR or Jaden Daniels? I would say I'll still ride with Jaden Daniels in week 16, even if it is a tough matchup. But do you think that Anthony Richardson offers any more upside, even if the defensive matchup might be a bit better for him?
I don't know if I'm starting quarterbacks against the Eagles at this point. I mean, we just saw them put the absolute clamps on the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, Lamar still had a good fantasy day, though, 23.9 fantasy points in that matchup. So maybe you do still just start Daniels, but I don't know. I'd be tempted to put Richardson in there. Richardson is just so boom or bust, but I do like his matchup much better than I like it for Daniels.
I would agree. Like, it's just for me the upside. I would say Daniels probably has more upside. I would say, can we at least agree with that? Daniels, like the ceiling is there for Daniels. I think that's where I'm looking at. And like in
is
week
it
16,
though? Like, I mean, Anthony Richardson's ceiling is as high as anyone. He can rush for 3 touchdowns in a week.
Oh, yeah, actually, because he just did well. Plus with the 2-point conversion. So yeah. All right. It's close.
It's close.
I'll say it's close. All right. Well, let's see. Like, you'll at least have some time to consider it. I know that the Colts are also one of the teams I'm buying week 14. Biggest barometer test for them would be like coming out of that bye. They do have to travel to Denver, so that would be the hardest thing for them. So, all right, I'd still lean Daniels. I know, LaMarca, you're on Anthony.
We got
Rich
time
right now
to discuss it. Fortunately,
we got time to figure it out. Let's see how things look again after the bye. But all right, so that's it for today. We got to get on out of here. Again, appreciate everybody stopping by. And as we said earlier, if we didn't get to your question, again, deepest apologies. Trying to get to as many as we can throughout the show. Again, check out the website. We've got all the tools that you need in order to answer those questions. The rankings, starts at tool, all of that stuff is there. Utilization report available with the tier 2 subscription. But again, we'll be back next week to answer as many more of your questions as we can. But until then, I'm Chris. That's LaMarca. And of course, for our producer, Paul.